How the West was won? In our case, speed. The heat is on here in Texas in more ways than one, and it's time for the qualifying in the Porsche Sprint Challenge USA West Series. Hi, I'm Joe Peak, and with me in the booth is Roush Racing driver Joey Atterbury and Carrera Cup North America driver Ashley Freiberg. Joey, hope our competitors have been drinking their fluids all day because it's a scorcher out there.
The temperatures are going to be a talking point all weekend, and I think ambient just before we started this qualifying session was right about 95 degrees. So talk about the temperatures inside these race cars, well over 100 degrees. Now a lot of these drivers run in some aids to help with that, either cool box system, air conditioning, whatever it may be, but the heat is very much here.
And Ashley, this is going to be a bit different from what we just witnessed as the Caymans for the North America Series just qualified. But the USA West Series has both the Cayman cars and the Cup cars out on the track at the same time. That's going to make for an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, fortunately, this track is really long, so it's going to be super key for each driver to find their spacing and make sure they have nice, clear track in front of them. And as we learned in that previous qualifying session, it's important to get your lap in as soon as possible because you never know if it could potentially go red or not.
Well, for one driver, they might be seeing red pretty shortly because Scott Blend already has a penalty for pit lane speed violation. Joey, that's a stop and go.
Yeah, and I think that there could be maybe a couple reasons for that. Either the pit lane speed limiter got clicked a little bit too early before the cones and he accelerated through them, hence going a little bit too fast on that violation, or it could just be that the pit lane speed limiter needs to be recalibrated. You know, I know that Scott is out there running a couple cars between the sprint stuff and then the endurance stuff, so I think that just come back in, make sure everything's all good, and he'll get back out there.
If anything, this is probably the car that he wants to take extra special care on, because if it's like what he did at Sonoma, he used the USA West car that he competed in the endurance race. So just needs to treat it with some kid gloves maybe and make sure and bring it home nice and clean as we watch the 269 of Jim Walsh starting a lap. He's not doing a full season this time around in the West Series like he did last time, as he's got some other races that he's going to go partake in elsewhere in the world. But he has been racing here before, and he's got some unfinished business, I'd say, Joey, because he unfortunately got taken out early in the endurance race last year here. So I have a feeling that this is going to be a big one for him to try and make up for the loss of track time.
Whenever you have a frustrating race at a specific racetrack, you always look back to going there, whether it's next month, next week, or next year, and yeah, it's always kind of seems like unfinished business, so it's fun to get back out there and really kind of prove what you could have done a year ago, but also improve on that, right? I learned a ton in that year span, so let's see what Jim can do.
Watching him coming down that long back straightaway, the longest straight on the track. You can see definitely a bit of elevation along the way as it rises and falls, really gentle, so not going to feel it too much in the car before he looks for his brake marker down into 12, where in come race time we might see a number of drivers just go a little bit too deep into there. Let's see if Scott Blend, who I think still needs to serve his penalty, goes deep, and no, he will manage to keep that in a good place on the track. So now they go through the stadium section to try and wrap this one up to bring up the end of the lap, and my goodness, it never ceases to amaze me, Ashley, just how quickly the time goes by here. We don't have any times on the board, and we're 5 minutes in.
Yeah, this track's pretty long. You have about 20 corners out here. It's about a 2-minute lap, so it does take some time to get some laps going here. It looks like we have Daniel with our first time lap here at a 2:11.6.
So that is Daniel Hanley in the Cup cars there, racing in the Cup Pro-Am. We'll have 4 different classes out running. The Cup, the 992 Pro-Ams, there's the 992 Masters, the Cayman Masters, and then we have one lone Cayman Pro-Am with Manny Tartaglione competing today. So for him, it's more about how high up overall he can manage to get today within his Cayman class. Still, I don't think we've seen. Let me double check to see if Scott has served his penalty, and I'm not seeing it. So
no, and the only thing that I may be thinking is, you know, race control. I don't see the message up on the board anymore, so maybe it was taken down. I'm not sure. You know, that's something for them to handle. It is still up on the history, and it does say plus 14, so I'm sure that the team will probably let him know. I always like these overhead shots through the S's. You really get to see how aggressive these drivers are kind of tackling some of these apex curbs. Some of them right on the red and white, some of them straddling those orange curbs. And Ashley, we were kind of hinting at it in between sessions. Here at COTA, you need to take advantage of the racetrack.
Yeah, you can see Scott there using all the track at the exit there. There are some areas where you can sort of play with some of the track limits. You can basically put your inside tire on the outer white line. So that gives you so much more radius. It allows you to roll a lot more speed through the corner. So if you can take advantage of it, definitely do it here. It can create a big time gain.
I almost wonder if maybe, and I don't know what the rules are on this, admittedly, I wonder if Scott's getting his 2 laps in and then he's going to come in and serve the penalty, or if he is required to come in immediately. We'll see if we can get some clarification on that. As Jesus, another driver that's taking part in all of the different races this weekend between the North America 992s, the USA West, and the Endurance Challenge. He's out there trying to get a lap down. We haven't mentioned that yet. That's the other thing about Scott Blend, is he's out there racing all 3 series.
It's pretty wild what he's doing here this weekend. Now, he has done it before. Remember at Sonoma, he raced Sprint Challenge, he raced West, and then he also raced the endurance race out there. And so he is essentially doing that again here at COTA. But the biggest difference is that temperature that you started off this stream with here. It's 95 degrees inside those race cars. It is well into the triple digits. He is an incredibly fit guy who is motivated, so I know that he's capable of it, but it's going to be a challenge.
And I'm very curious, Ashley, what does it feel like inside the car in these situations? Because I mean, I know what it feels like at 100 or 105 out. 140. What is your body going through?
Oh my goodness. It's really, really hot. I mean, I run the cool shirt and I don't really feel it, to be honest, halfway through a race. So you're in survival mode, to be honest. Your brain is just kind of on autopilot, and all of your focus, your mental focus, is on the driving. It has to be, because otherwise, if you start to think about how hot you are, you will drop back like an anchor for sure. So it's definitely a big, big challenge for sure.
Can't stress enough how physical it is to try and drive these race cars in conditions such as these, even with the niceties that the drivers might have at their disposal. It's going to make it a pretty rough day out there. Scott Blend is our quickest so far overall, and in that Masters category is Brandon Hakens, the fastest in the Pro-Ams for the 992s. Meanwhile, Tom Rogers, right now the fastest driver down in the Cayman Masters. So he's beat out Bufkin by about 0.2 of a second, it looks like, Joey.
Yeah, he's got about 1.4 seconds on Greg Herback, who kind of rounds out the top 3 in that Cayman Masters class. And then, of course, we've got Tartaglione down there in the Cayman Pro-Am class as well. I'm not sure if they're going to be sharing that same car. Of course, we had that little bit of an incident in the previous qualifying session, so I'm hoping to see the Tartagliones back out there on the racetrack. But as of right now, it is those 6 Caymans: Rogers, Bufkins, Herback, Smith, Marshall, and Bradshaw.
About 15 minutes left on the clock. Still a fair bit of time left to go, so this could definitely swap around to see who comes away with our Solaris flying lap pole position. And Scott Blend, has he served that yet? Let me double check the race control. Still not seeing any notification. Usually we see that show up if he does serve that penalty, so it does make me wonder, as you alluded to, Joey, if maybe there was if it was rescinded or something that we just didn't know about.
Yeah, and I also kind of I really like your thought process of, all right, well, if the team is on the radio and saying, okay, we do have a penalty, but we need to get these laps in because we just saw a red flag happen in the previous qualifying session, usually race control allows you a grace period of a couple laps. I know that in race situations, it's usually 2 or 3 laps to pretty much adhere to what they want to do. So I wonder if they kind of have that same process here in qualifying. And that's a smart call from that team in order to go down and get those qualifying laps in just in case.
Watching Greg Herback on the screen right now. He's about 1.6 off the pole, it looks like, currently, of Rogers. And trying to, as he takes a lot of that inside. In fact, he straddles the second one. And I haven't seen any notifications about those track limits, so it does look like, I guess that must be fair game if he's been running that line. But he is taking quite a bit of them. Other interesting thing, I didn't notice before that they had placed tires at some of the apexes. That is a new one here.
I think that was only at that one specific turn coming up the hill, the turn number 9 there. And it's really to kind of prevent the cars from driving into the actual dirt. Now, we've talked about the pavement. There's tons of track limits that you can go and violate or not. But the last thing you want to do is be dragging up all of these rocks and sand onto the racetrack.
Exactly. And Herback here is only his second season as a professional race car driver, but has really picked up the pace this second time around. He's been very competitive, hopping in this time and taking multiple podiums. In fact, he's only not finished on the podium the very first race, and that's because he got involved in an incident at Spring Mountain early in that first race. Ever since then, he has just been rifling them off. And as he sits third on the timing sheets, he's sitting in a good spot to try and carry that on today once he gets to that race. But let's see what this lap looks like for him, as I'm not showing green sectors on that first two, so I don't know if he's going to go quicker this time by.
And I do kind of have to chuckle to myself a little bit because Herback is a downhill skier, former professional downhill skier, so he knows all about hitting gates with those elbows. That's just like those orange curbs out there.
That's a good point, yeah. He knows about trying to maximize that racing line, as we've talked about that with him. The 44 of Tom Rogers, our current pole sitter right now in the Cayman Masters, coming around this last lap time. Also not an improvement, but man, he's not sitting too badly out there with that quarter of a second over Bufkin. Yes, he could make that up, but it's got him up to that top spot, at least for the time being.
And we've been talking about the track limits violations and these cars jumping over those apex curbs. Ashley, maybe you can talk about what happens when it goes wrong. What happens when the driver actually clips that apex curb with the wheel instead of actually going over it?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with some of, we call them sausage curbs or bread loaves, or however you want to word them. Some of these corners have a much taller apex curb. So how you hit the curb completely dictates how the car handles through the corner. So some of them, you want to hit them at the right angle so that the car the tire sits on top of the curbing. You don't want to hit it where the curb's more of a ramp, because it can actually bounce the car offline. And in these interconnected corners, it can really mess you up through the rest of the sector. So that's why this track is so technical, and it's so important that you're really precise with your car placement. You can see them as well through the S's. They're straddling those curbs. If you manage to hit one of those, it really bounces the car off. So you definitely have to, if you can, do a track walk here and see how big those curbs are and how to place your car around them.
Man, it is quite a gap overall right now, Joey. I just realized we have 1.3 seconds between Blend and Walsh for our overall pole, and that is within class too for the Masters here. Scott is using this extra track time to great effect.
It's pretty impressive, that lap time that Scott Blend in that bright yellow number 245 was able to put down a 209.9. So the first car that at least I've seen break that 210 barrier here at COTA this weekend. And then, of course, Jim Walsh sitting there at a 211.2. Our Cayman's Masters provisional pole right now is a 218.217, and you compare that to the Sprint Challenge North America qualifying session that we just had about 10 minutes ago. I think there might be a little bit of time still on the board for those Caymans, but as of right now, Rogers leading the way.
Keep an eye out for Brandon Hankins. He's our provisional pole sitter for the 992 Pro-Ams, leading Daniel Hanley. Both of them still looking for their first victory in the USA West Series. We do not have Luke French here this weekend, who's taken the lion's share of them, only missing out on one so far in the 4 races we've run in this series. So for Daniel and Brandon, Joey, this is kind of an open goal.
It was fun watching that car go through there. I'm not sure if you caught that, Ashley, but straddled those first 2 apex curbs in the S's and then actually stayed off of that curb. And oh no, a little bit of a trouble moment. I think this is Herback later on in the course, the 49 getting spun around. Good to see him pointed the right way, and I take that back. That was not further down the course. That was actually in Sector 1 in those S sections, Joe.
May have been turn 5 there that we saw that happening. And unfortunately, there are some pretty significant gravel traps there, so the car can get stuck. And again, we already saw the Cayman qualifying for the North America Series earlier today. If you cause a red flag, your 2 fastest laps get deleted. You really don't want to cause problems out here during the qualifying session, or it makes life miserable come the race.
And talking a little bit technical, nerdy again, going to bring in the race car driver. Where Herbeck had that spin, you're shifting the weight left, right. There's a lot going on, and you approach that section very rapidly.
Yes, gosh, turn 3 is super, super fast. And then, yeah, like once you get up into turn 5 and 6, the elevation changes as well, and the shape of the corner. So the S's progressively get tighter as you go through them, and then you're heading into turn 6, which is slightly off camber. So a lot is happening dynamically with the car through there, and it's definitely easy to get a little too much speed, or maybe not the right angle over one of the curbs, as we talked about. So anything can really happen there.
Saw somebody coming through the triple apexer there past the tower getting very loose, Joey. I don't know if you caught who it was, but we both kind of raised our eyebrows as that tail was wagging mid-corner.
And it kind of goes to what Ashley was just talking about. When you enter that 16, 17, 18 complex, if we stay watching with Tim Smith here, he's going to be approaching that complex that we're talking about. This is turn number 15 right here. Really keep it in tight and then accelerate. But when you enter 16, this right-hander, you are flat out. You're carrying as much speed as possible, and then through the middle, you're kind of breathing that throttle a little bit, just trying to get that front end to turn, trying to manage the back end of the car. But if you go in there too fast with too much commitment, you can definitely pull off a really cool-looking slide. It's not that fast, though.
Exactly. Not the drift course cars, these Porsches, but just saw what looked like Herbeck coming in, and I didn't quite make out who that other driver coming down pit lane was, but it looked like one of our Caymans. So a few just taking a momentary pause here in qualifying while Smith crosses the line, and I don't see an improvement for him this time by. However, Snyder moves up to 5th in the Masters, the 992 Masters class in that number 200 car, just behind Francisco Tejesus. In fact, that may have been some of the first laps we've gotten from Snyder.
Saw him out there getting acclimated to the racetrack a little bit earlier, and good to see him dropping those lap times a little bit more competitive as we watch Tim continue through Sector 1 here. You might notice that white rear bumper. We talked to him a little bit earlier today. Had a little bit of a mishap yesterday, but he learned from it, and he is back on that gas pedal.
Yeah, unfortunately backed the car into a barrier at one point, but said it was pretty easy to fix. Just had to replace that part of the car, so changed the color scheme, at least temporarily, for this weekend, and hopefully that won't take any speed away from the Blue Angel machine as he comes down the back stretch and starts to unleash the power of these proper Caymans, I guess you could call them, because these are cars that have a little bit more power than what you see in the multi-make series, which experiences the balance of performance that you see in typical GT4 racing. These GT4 Caymans have been effectively unleashed, so they've got a lot more grunt underneath them.
Yeah, it is that 4-liter motor, and it's got about 500 horsepower is what those Caymans have, and of course 6-cylinder NA, 8,400 RPM, and then they've got that 7-speed PDK as well as the ABS going on. So lots of things to help these drivers really kind of promote their learning curve and really get up to speed quickly out here. These race cars, it doesn't matter if it's the Cayman GT4s or these GT3 Cup cars, incredible cars to drive.
15 out of our 16 have put a time down. Don't see one from Manny Tartaglione quite yet. He's showing as being in pit lane. If he is going to get one in, he's going to have to get out there right this second, essentially, while we watch Smith cross the line once more. He goes personal best in the final sector, but he stays at that 2:19.8 and won't be higher than 4th this time by. Herbeck still ahead of him by, actually very, very close. Look at the gap between them. It is less than 1/10 of a second, I think.
That was a great lap that Tim was able to put in recently there, and you're right, just kind of about a tenth of a second back from where Herback is. I see the 2:21 of De Jesus was able to put in another fast lap, so he kind of moves up the order. Still stays the same in terms of that GT3 Cup order, but just kind of progressively getting faster out there on the racetrack. And I know that this is a Blue Angels theme livery that Tim Smith has going on, but it almost looks like it's got a Thunderbird part on the back end with all that white.
Does that mean Thunderbirds are go for this weekend?
I don't know. We'll have to talk with him about how much Thunderbirds and Blue Angels cross mix.
Do anybody even get Thunderbird references these days? Because that was old school when I was a kid. Honestly, or are we talking about different
We're
things?
talking about two different things. I'm
Okay.
talking about our U.S. Air Force Thunderbird demo team
I
versus
should have
our
known.
U.S. Navy Blue Angels demo team.
There was a kids show called The Thunderbirds way back when, so we're clearly on different pages. But regardless, it does seem like Tim doing a good job out there today. As he continues to try and chase down Herback for that third position in class. Not a lot of cars left on track. I kind of don't blame them. In this heat, I probably would want to park it after I'm satisfied, Joey.
That's exactly the point that I was going to make. And Ashley, I mean, if you were able to go out there and perform 2 qualifying laps that you were happy with, would you want to try to go get more, or would you say, hey, let's bring it in?
Honestly, if you can crank it out in 2 laps right off the bat, then you want to pit and save your tires for the race. But, I mean, it really depends on how those 2 laps went. If you can come in and bleed your tire pressures and go back out for 1 more, maybe that's the case. But ultimately, you want to get those laps in right away and then park it.
Not surprised that Henry Marshall's going to keep going here, because the last lap time for Henry, he had 2 personal best second and third sectors, rather. So it looks like he's finding some good pace, and he sits 5th in the Cayman Masters class. Needs to try and catch up to Tim Smith, and has a good opportunity to do so here, potentially on his last flying lap. Not sure if he'll get around in time for that one, but we're now underneath that 2:20 mark, so in fact under the 2-minute mark, so everybody is on their final flyer here pretty soon.
I'm curious to see if Henry can drop a little bit more time. I think that he's right in the range that he needs to be in, but remember, this was a winner out there at Spring Mountain, and then also had a tremendous run at Sonoma as well. And then, of course, they're always competing in those endurance challenge events. So Henry Marshall obviously still learning Circuit of the Americas out here. 2:22.4 is what his current lap time is, and pole for that class is a 2:18.2. So we can see there's definitely still some time for Henry to learn and shave off on this car, but that's part of what qualifying is. Get out there and see where those limits are.
I'm glad to see that, yeah, he's still managing to find pace out there, so that means he is improving and learning with each and every lap. So we watch him come around at the end here. This is it, just a couple corners to go to wrap this one up, trying to get that wide entry down into 15. And then up through the triple apexer of Turkey here as he picks speed up towards the very blind turn 19.
And speaking of turn 19, I think it is one of the more overlooked corners on this racetrack. And Ashley, bring you in again. Turn 19, you got a huge head of steam coming out of that awesome triple right apex over there, but you're going downhill. The track continues downhill, and it almost seems like it just washes everything out.
Yeah, 19 is really hard to get right, and it's hard to feel right as a driver when you run it in the right way. A lot of it is because it's so blind, and like you said, it is downhill, and you're carrying so much speed going into it. The timing of your brake release, your downshift, everything has to be absolutely perfect there because it's pretty high speed. And when you're losing grip like that, you have to just make sure you're super precise and gentle with the car as you go through that section.
Checkered flag is out for the qualifying. Drivers are allowed to complete their hot laps. Looks like we got one coming across just now, trying to improve. That's one of our Cup cars, and I think that was Snyder, who does not go quicker, stays P5 in class. Tom Rogers, though? No, Francisco de Jesus, does gain some time, but stays 4th in class, just moves up overall to 9th of all of the cars out there competing right now. Just need Herback and Marshall, and it looks like Krigler, I think, still out there somewhere.
Yeah, and I think out of those names that you said, I'm definitely looking towards Henry Marshall, as it looks like Herback has actually entered pit lane right here, so he's not going to complete that lap. So we'll see if that number 78, that white, black, and red, what do they call the Red Shoe Gang over there at HM Road Racing?
That's right.
See if he can shave off a little bit more time.
For those that don't know, I mean, literally, the Red Shoe crew, they all wear these bright red racing shoes, and it's easy to pick them out in the paddock, but I do love that they've got kind of that theme going for them. Henry Marshall and Krigler still now the last ones showing, so we wait for them to come on around. Marshall looks like he is in the third sector. Same thing with Krigler, but I am seeing Marshall again on 2 personal best sectors. He could still find quite a bit of pace.
Yeah, and just the difference between him and Tim Smith is not necessarily a ton out there. So if Henry can kind of just shave off a little bit more time, like we were saying, 219.9 out of Tim Smith, then Henry's sitting at a 221.3. So if he can maybe improve just that little bit, he'll be able to scoot himself up on that grid. Unfortunately, crosses the start-finish line and did not improve that lap time.
It's a bit of a shame. Even still, like I said, I'm really glad to see all the speed that he is finding. Just has to put them all together, which wraps up our qualifying session for the Porsche Sprint Challenge USA West. The Solaris flying lap goes to Scott Blend, as Jim Walsh will be starting next to him on that front row. Pole down in the Pro-Ams goes to Brandon Hankins, as he'll be flanked by Daniel Handley, 4th overall. Wilgus will be starting in 5th, and Johnson in 6th. Mark Krigler will be P7 today. Tom Rogers is your pole sitter in the Cayman Masters. They'll be followed by Francisco de Jesus. Gary Buffkin will be starting in 10th, as Greg Herback starts 11th. Tim Smith will be 12th overall. Then you've got Snyder 13th, Henry Marshall in 14th, Bradshaw in 15th, and Tartaglione was not classified in today's qualifying session. We're going to take just a little bit of a break. We'll be back with more coverage of the 992 North America Series for Porsche Sprint Challenge.